Hello, the topic we are discussing today is stages of development. The objectives of this module are: at the end of this chapter, students will know the different stages of development and understand the course of development in each particular stage. They will understand different concepts related to development and characteristic patterns of behavior of each stage. The term development is defined as patterns of change over time which begin at conception and continue throughout the lifespan. The process begins as the fetus emerges from one single cell organism to a full-term individual. As the genetic program within the cells of the body unfolds, important characteristics emerge that will set the stage for the newborn baby's emergence into the world. Important changes occur during every period of development, and the world around the developing child exerts its influence on growth. The scientific study of human development seeks to understand and explain how and why people change throughout the life. This includes all aspects of human growth, including physical, emotional, intellectual, social, and personality development. Development proceeds by different stages, and each stage has its own characteristic pattern of behavior. The major developmental stages are prenatal stage, infancy, early childhood, late childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. Life begins in the reproductive system of the female. The term natal means birth, so prenatal means before birth. This prenatal period extends from conception to birth. Conception occurs when a single cell called sperm from the male unites with an ovum in the female's fallopian tube in the process called fertilization, forming a zygote. It undergoes a tremendous growth from a single cell organism complete with a brain and behavioral capabilities in approximately 9 months of time. Prenatal development is divided into 3 periods: germinal, embryonic, and fetal. The germinal period. This is the period of prenatal development that takes place in the first 2 weeks of conception. It includes the creation of the zygote, continued cell division, and the attachment of the zygote to the uterine wall. The germinal period begins with rapid cell division of the zygote. By approximately 1 week after conception, the zygote is composed of 100 to 150 cells. The differentiation of cells, meaning their specialization for different tasks, begins in this period. There are 2 parts of the zygote. Blastocyst is the inner layer of cells that later develops into an embryo. Trophoblast is the outer layer of cells that develops into the system that provides nutrition and support to the embryo. The germinal period ends with the implantation, that is, the attachment of the zygote to the uterine wall, which takes place about 10 days after conception. However, the possible hazards of this period are that the ovum may not get implanted and dies due to insufficient hormones or lack of proper balance between glands and ovaries of the mother. The embryonic period. This period of prenatal development occurs between 2 to 8 weeks after conception. During the embryonic period, the rate of cell differentiation intensifies, support systems for the cell forms, and organs appear. The period begins as the zygote attaches to the uterine wall and forms additional layers of cells. At this stage, the developing organism is called an embryo. The embryo has 3 layers. The embryo's endoderm is the inner layer of cells which will develop into the digestive and respiratory systems. The mesoderm is the middle layer which will become the circulatory systems, bones, muscles, excretory system, and reproductive system. The ectoderm is the outermost layer which will become the nervous system, sensory receptors like ears, nose and eyes, and skin parts like hair and nails. Every body part eventually develops from these 3 layers. As the embryo's 3 layers form, life support systems for the embryo develop rapidly, mostly from the trophoblast. The life support system include the amnion, the placenta, and the umbilical cord. The amnion is a sac that contains a clear fluid in which the developing embryo floats. This fluid is called amniotic fluid. It provides an environment that is temperature and humidity controlled as well as serves as a shock proof. The placenta is a life support system that consists of tissues in which small blood vessels from the mother and the offspring intertwine but do not join. The umbilical cord contains 2 arteries and 1 vein that connect the baby to the placenta. However, hazards of the period is that if the embryo does not get enough of protection and nourishment, there may be a miscarriage or malformation. The fetal period. This period begins 2 months after conception and lasts for 7 months on an average. Growth and development continue their dramatic course during this period. 3 months after conception, the fetus becomes active and starts moving its arms and legs. It can open and close its mouth and move its head. The features of the fetus are distinguishable and can be identified as male or female. During this time, growth spurt occurs in the body's lower parts and prenatal reflexes are stronger and movements can be felt by the mother. During these 7 months, the fetus grows in weight and all the organs and body parts become fully formed. Although it is safer from the embryonic period, it is not free from hazards, as the fetus could be born prematurely. Secondly, the period of infancy. Infancy is the first stage of human development after birth, which continues till 2nd year of life. Infancy is a time of extreme dependency on adults. It has a major role in later development, as during this period the child explores the world through the sensory and motor skills. Many psychological activities are just beginning, such as language, symbolic thought, sensory motor coordination and social learning, to name a few. The first 2 weeks of this period have 2 subdivisions. The period of partenate lasts from the time the fetus emerges from the mother's body until the umbilical cord has been cut and tied. Secondly, the period of neonate lasts from the cutting and tying the cord until approximately the end of 2nd week of life. In the first several days of life, most newborns lose 5 to 7% of their body weight. Hardly any growth takes place during this stage. 2 weeks after birth, the infant gets adjusted to a completely new environment, and once they adjust to sucking, swallowing and digesting, they grow rapidly and increase in weight and height. A neonate is born with a number of reflexes which are inborn, involuntary responses that occur automatically in the presence of certain stimuli. These reflexes unfold naturally as a part of infant's ongoing maturation. Some examples of reflexes are: rooting reflex causes the neonate to turn their head towards the object that touches their cheek, such as their mother's finger or a bottle. Sucking reflex promotes infants to suck at the things that touch their lips. Infants lose their primitive reflexes after the first few months of life, replacing them with more complex and organized behaviors. Although at birth a neonate is capable of only jerky, limited voluntary movements, during the first year of life the ability to move independently grows, and fine muscle movements become increasingly sophisticated. During infancy, the child also develops sensory and muscular skills and explores the world through these skills. They can adjust to different sounds and recognize their mother's voice. They are able to recognize different tastes and smells. The child imitates others, gets to know them more closely and learns to trust or distrust people. By the 2nd year of life, the child develops sufficient motor skills which enable them to be self-reliant. Development of language occurs during this stage, and the child is able to understand a lot of words of what others are talking and understands what these words stand for. Early childhood. This stage extends from 2 years up to 6 to 7 years. Growth is not as rapid as it was in infancy. Both boys and girls slim down as the trunks of their bodies lengthen. Although their heads are still somewhat large for their bodies, by the end of the preschool years, most children have lost their top-heavy look. Body fat also shows a slow decline during the preschool years. Girls have more fat tissue and boys have more muscle tissue. However, growth patterns vary individually. By the time the children are 2 years old, they become less dependent on their parents and more self-reliant, and they increasingly prefer to play with their playmates. During the first half of the stage, the child is busy picking up the skills to communicate and learns the motor skills of walking and running. By 3 years of age, the child uses almost all forms of adult language and takes an interest in the outside world, but understands it only in terms of concrete and perceptual experiences. The child is very imaginative. Imagination and initiative develops as the child starts to interact with the outside world and explores, experiments, and asks questions. Through his activities, he understands the world around him. Concrete experiences are very important as he develops his concept through them. Happiness in early childhood depends more on what happens to children in the home rather than outside the home. The important physical hazards of early childhood include mortality, illnesses, accidents, unattractiveness, and obesity. Whereas the psychological hazards of early childhood are unsocial content of speech, failure to learn social adjustments due to lack of guidance, too much emphasis on amusement, and too little on active play, and deterioration in family relationships. Late childhood extends from 6 years until the child becomes sexually mature. This period involves slow and consistent growth. It is a period of calm before the rapid growth spurt of adolescence. The increase in weight is mainly due to the increase in the size of skeletal and muscular systems as well as in the size of some body organs. Muscle mass and strength gradually increase as baby fat decreases. This stage is labeled by parents as the troublesome or quarrelsome age. By educators, it's called as elementary school age, and psychologists call it as the gang age, the age of conformity, or the age of creativity. A child at this age moves around in groups which consist of others of the same sex. Gang loyalty and prejudices against other gangs are fierce. Group games matter a great deal. Being left out in the group game is something that makes the child feel very miserable. Thinking is more flexible and relates objects to each other and classifies them according to different criteria and uses symbol but not abstract thinking. Adolescence extends from 13 to 19 years. It begins with the onset of puberty. It is an important period of lifespan, a transitional period between childhood and adulthood. It is a time of change, exploration, exuberance, and youthful searching. It can also be a time of worry and problems, especially in today's world. During adolescence, a person's identity and moral values come into sharper focus, a time when the individual searches for identity as to who I really am. Adolescence is also called as a period of heightened emotion, a time of storm and stress. Puberty is a biological event when hormonal changes promote rapid physical growth and sexual maturity. The growth spurt occurs during puberty earlier for girls than for boys. For girls, the onset of puberty typically occurs between 9 and 12 years of age, and for boys, the age range is 11 to 14 years. Major physical changes occur during this time, such as voice cracks and changes. Other secondary sexual features become more evident. Awareness and attraction of the opposite sex develops and becomes extremely sensitive. The adolescent finds it difficult to establish his or her own identity. However, with adequate support and guidance from teachers and family, he or she is able to resolve the upheaval successfully. The adolescent is capable of logical reasoning and abstract thinking in this stage. The important social changes in adolescence include increased peer group influence, more mature patterns of social behavior, new social groupings, and new values of selecting friends and leaders, and they value social acceptance. Physical hazards during this stage include awkwardness, a sex-inappropriate body structure are too common. The major psychological hazards of adolescence center on failure to make the transition to maturity, which is the most important developmental task of this stage. Adulthood is the longest period of the lifespan and is usually subdivided into 3 periods. Early adulthood extends from 20 years to 40 years. Middle adulthood or middle age extends from 40 to 60 years. Late adulthood or old age extends from 60 years until death. Early adulthood. There are certain aids to mastering the developmental tasks of early adulthood, such as physical efficiency, motor and mental abilities, motivation, and a good role model. Because many of the interests carried over from adolescence are no longer appropriate for the adult role, changes in all areas of life are inevitable. Personal interests in early adulthood include interest in appearance, in clothes, personal adornment, in symbols of maturity and status, in religion and money. This period is marked by a struggle to end the dependency on parents, and this causes a lot of anxiety about the future. The trend in mid-20s is to seek mastery of the real world. In this stage, 2 dominant activities are very prominently seen. That is, accomplishment or seeking competence, and the other is to reach out to other people. Married couples in this stage place a lot of importance on togetherness. Around the age of 30, many people experience a minor life crisis. People of this age typically become more aware of the short span of life. Having realized they have limited number of years, they exert pressure on themselves. Attempts are intensified to succeed at a career or establish and realize one's life goal. Social activities are greatly curtailed because the individual places a lot of importance on professional and family pressures. The heart of this crisis is a serious questioning as to what life is all about and confidence in the choices that they have previously made. Unsettled by these developments, the person actively searches for a style of living that is more meaningful. Marriages during this period are more vulnerable, and this is a time of dissatisfaction. Extramarital affairs and divorces are most commonly seen. Middle adulthood. The urgency of the previous stage gives way to a calmer acceptance of one's fate in the late 40s. The predominant feeling is that one can accept the decisions that were made earlier. Those who have families begin to appreciate their children as individuals and ease upon their tendency to extend their own goals to their children's behaviors. Nurturing, teaching, and serving others help alleviate stress and anxiety in this stage. In this stage, adjustment to physical changes is especially difficult in the areas of appearance, physiological functioning, and sexuality. The female menopausal syndrome is partly due to estrogen deprivation and partly to the environmental stress that is psychological in nature. The male climacteric syndrome is due to a combination of physiological and psychological conditions that often lead to changes in attitudes, behaviors, and self-evaluation. Middle age can be called as the shrinking circle of family life because the most important change at this time is a reduction of family members living under the same roof. Late adulthood. It begins at approximately 60 years and is characterized by certain physical and psychological changes. Emphasis is placed on sharing day-to-day joys and sorrows. There is a less concern regarding glamour, wealth, and accomplishments. Many of the tensions of the previous years give way to a desire to savor life and its small pleasures. Developmental tasks of this group include adjusting to changes in physical strength and health, forming a new family role as in-law or a grandparent, affiliating with one's own group, adjusting to retirement and reduced income. It also includes developing post-retirement activities that enhance self-worth and usefulness. They also engage in arranging satisfactory physical living quarters and adjust to the death of a spouse, family member or friend. They conduct a life review and prepare for the inevitability of one's own death. The span of a person's life can be examined in many ways. Development can be viewed through progressive changes from one stage to another. The process of development from one period to the next seems gradual. And though the study of life can be compartmentalized with every portion separated and sectioned off, each period of life remains connected in one's lifespan.